Good evening. Welcome to Thursday, February 19th, Budget and Finance Committee meeting. At 6 p.m. we are called to order. Motion for adoption of the agenda. Okay. Second, all in favor? Aye. There we go. Matt, if you just want to speak up when you need to, that'd be fine. I recognize.
Thank you, Summer.
Just the voice behind the curtain over there. Okay, we have a moment for public comment, so I will read. The committee is not accepting online public comments. This portion of the agenda is set aside for the public to address the committee on agenda items. However, the committee may not respond to comments from the public. If the comments are of a nature that the committee does not have influence or control over, then the chair or presiding officer may request the speaker suspend their comments. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. Is there anybody in the room who'd like to have, if we not have anyone signed up, would anyone like to have a public comment? In the front.
All right, thanks. I'm Julian Anderson, Lake Forest Park resident. And I appreciate the inclusion of public comments in your agenda. The importance of this council committee is often underrated. You are positioned to exercise detailed oversight of the city's complex financial activities and records, and to increase the level of understanding of city finances among all residents. Many of the discussions leading up to the creation of Prop 1 and during the campaign season included inaccurate, misleading assertions about aspects of city finances. The resulting intellectual fog was not pretty. For a few years, I've puzzled over the budget monitoring dashboard, the report that you see regularly. Perhaps I just haven't found it, but is there an explanation of this concentrated information form beyond the few sentences at the beginning? This would allow simple questions for amateurs, like what is signified if a bar is blue, as in the non-operating department bar graphs, to be answered. Sometimes I've looked at this report and wished it had an answer for these questions. Whenever budgeted amounts are reported, what was the amount in the original biennial budget as adopted by the council? And how has that been changed by budget amendments, as well as the current amount that is the result of adoption and amendment? I'd suggest that whenever there is a budget column, that it be expanded to include original, change, and current amounts. Second, fund balances, especially the general fund. This was much discussed by the council before authorizing Prop 1 and by residents subsequently. Everyone would have a better basis for discussion if fund balances were reported in the dashboard. For me, that should include all the funds listed in revenue by fund table and perhaps others. For example, where is that tree fund reported? Also, this report needs a summary that highlights significant items within the report. In budget and finance meetings, the finance director usually introduces each of these dashboards orally with such a summary. I think the report would be more accessible to casual readers if those remarks or similar were part of the report itself. Thanks for your work on city finance.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in public comment?
Yeah.
Seeing none, close our public comment period. Thank you so much, Julian, for bringing those to our attention. And we move to the director's report to describe our dashboard in detail. Let's see what happens.
So I'm going to give our clerk a minute to pull it up so that we're all looking at the same document. And while he's doing that, I will go over that this is December of 2025. The city has an open period within January. So within 20 days into January, it's called the open period, where expenditures are reported back into, so in 26, expenditures are still reported that are applicable to 2025, back to 2025. In order for the intention is to have our financials report as accurately as possible. Again, it's not always perfect, and sometimes 25 expenditures walk into 26, but there has to be a cutoff. And so the state auditor has decided 20 days is an appropriate amount of time. And whatever comes in within that time, then we charge it back. So this is the December, so the target number is 50%. This report does include the mid-biennial budget adjustment that was adopted by City Council within in December, at the first meeting in December. And so, as you have seen previous reports that showed a lot of yellow indicators, which were overspending, they were trued up during that mid-biennial budget process in order to reflect more accurately of where the city is walking into with their budgets. Going down into the operating departments. So as an overall statement, the operating departments, this is where the target is 50%. This is where these departments trend on that. So they're trending through the month to month target of expending through salaries through an ongoing basis. Occasionally there's the one-offs, and the one-offs being in January, you will see this on the dashboard where insurance, we pay a very large insurance bill to cover all of the city's property, etc. insurance, and that is due in January. And so sometimes that will skew some of the beginning reports, but we're not quite there yet. That will be on the next report. So then just walking through the operating departments, these tend to trend typically as with salaries, benefits, and an ongoing continual cost that can be measured in that manner. There's always the exception to the rule, which walking down to Civil Service Commission, that's at 72%. It's a small piece of the budget that it goes into that. That is directly tied to police hiring. And as the council knows, there has been a lot of that, which has been brought forth at a lot of council meetings. So you've been seeing the retirements and the new hires coming in and being sworn in. That is directly tied to that. So then just walking down, we have the, Crime Watch, that's a little higher, but it's such a small dollar amount that it just doesn't affect the overall allocation budget line item. Detention and jail, that's at 40%, dispatch 49%, engineering operations 44%, environmental services, that is actually environmental services. I will just highlight that is where the city does not have a tree fund. The tree accounts are within the environmental services line item. So it's within that is where the allocations are, the expenditures occur. Again, a fund is when, like the general fund, the street fund, it's where that fund stands alone. And when we have allocations for like an account, or we're complying with our city code, which then has fines that come in and are directly allocated separately. And then the expenditures that are approved through the Lake Forest Parks Municipal Code that are appropriate to tie to that are within that are allocated by a budget through the budget process, and that's where they are. So then walking down the executive department, that's at 47%. We had some amendments there. Facilities, we had some big amendments there for some very large one-time expenditures within City Hall. Finance is within target. Legal is right on at 49%. Municipal court, they're right on. Municipal services, that is the clerk's office. We did some amendments there. Increasing, we had some direct expenditures due to passports. So we increased the revenue and the expenditure side on that's great news. Honestly, there's a win. There's a feel-good story. Oh, a good piece. Parks, 35%. Planning, 50%. And planning is going to show right at 50%. It'll be interesting to kind of watch that one because we had some large expenditures within the planning department. We had a really large, what was the grant? What was that $500,000 grant?
The climate development.
The climate element, I'm sorry, is that Department of Commerce? Department of Commerce grant. And so there was a large expenditure that came out in 2025. So we'll keep an eye on that for 26. But it's good that they're within target even with that. So that would not alarm me if that was a little over because of that one-time expenditure that we did have revenue for in addition to the expense. The police are within the 48%, and prosecutor, public defense, 34, sewer operations, 47, street maintenance and street operations. Those are broken out into two separate things. It's one fund. So together, that's doing just fine. Surface water utility, operations, that's at 37%. The traffic safety camera, that is the actual fund, and the traffic safety operations is at 32%. And then walking down to the
If I can
non,
just ask if
Absolutely.
any of my fellow council members do you have any questions, Councilmember Muhlenberg, or good? Okay. All right. Hearing nothing from Councilmember Muhlenberg, please continue.
and I will make another comment just briefly. The graphs are visually very easy to see, but for my numbers, for my people that love numbers, they're on the back side of this dashboard. So if you would like to see the exact numbers of budgets and expenditures that are tied to those, they are provided on the back side of the monthly dashboards. So then walking down.
We have a question.
Oh,
Is there between-
sorry about that.
So on the capital fund, the total, because there's the department budget and pay to date, I guess, is that budget amount the total budget amount for that item, or is that just for the period?
It's the budgeted amount is for the biennial budget.
So, okay,
So it's for 25 and 6.
okay,
So it's for 2 years. So that's why the target is at 50%. So, and that is meeting target because we are halfway through a 2-year budget. And that's what that's demonstrating. Great question. Thank you.
Question for my colleague.
Yes, so the public comment inspired a related comment from me. The tree board has often asked about the tree account. Kind of like, what is it? How much money is in there? Can some of that money be used to fund tree planting events or tree giveaway events? And so if that sort of information can be provided to the tree board, I'm sure they'd be very appreciative of that.
We can absolutely do that. And yes, it is tracked separately on the revenues and expenditures.
another question. Pretty please.
Yes.
So for some of a lot of people have been talking about traffic calming and that can include trees as well, cutting back trees. Where does that money possibly come from? Is it separate, or does it, like, if you're cutting back vegetation in order to improve a sight line, for example, where would that money come from? Because it would be for traffic calming, but.
Correct. So that would be. If there's an improvement, this is a little bit gray.
Right.
In the sense of there's traffic calming, if there is a new improvement, that's gonna come out of your transportation capital fund. So if it's a new improvement, if it's a maintenance being that we're cutting back vegetation, that's probably gonna come from the street fund because that's street maintenance, sightline maintenance. So maintenance and capital, maintenance is an ongoing, like an operational charge versus if we're putting in some type of a new traffic calming, I'm like, I am drawing a blank on the
I
word.
get it.
Improvement that is a new, like a speed bump. In a road or if we're putting out to narrow the road to get people to slow down, That would be a new improvement, so that would come out and be funded out of the 302, which would be the transportation capital. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor.
Excuse me, for, one of the things that's important to recognize is that it's a sightline issue that involves private property. Where it intersects with with a right of way, that part of it would be the city's responsibility. If it's something that is a sightline issue, we've had this happen before, sidewalks and some other places. The city has worked very closely with the homeowners to try to give them the opportunity to do it themselves. If they do not, and it becomes a safety hazard, then very rarely the city has to intervene and say, we're going to delete vegetation back to a certain point to protect the visual visibility and the safety of the community. And then they get billed for the public works or the contract time, which in my estimation, I think that's only happened 2 times that I've recall.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
Oh, and one from.
There's a time.
Thanks for the dashboard as always. One of the questions I had is why is the environmental services so low? Is there a major expenditure coming up in the second year?
Why is it the environmental services so low? Meaning the budget allocation?
Well, no, why is it at 8%?
Percent.
Yeah. Is there a major spend coming up?
That is a great question.
Okay.
I don't, and I think that directly ties into
Right.
Councilmember Goldman's request of, can we have an outline of the fund balances? And, you know, because that allocation comes from the city forestry when we charge for that, fines, penalties, etc., tree permits. And that is how that account is funded. In addition to, so the expenditures of, and that I believe is within the code. The code lists out very specifically what that money can pay for, I believe.
I would assume that the
Double
budget
check.
was set.
Yes.
The prior arborist, and we've gone through another arborist, so not a lot is getting done on that front by having that vacant. Because we don't have an arborist, we just use contract arborists to just review permits. There's nothing's getting moved forward. There's no programs, there's no events.
Some plantings.
It's all about, yeah.
And in addition, the increase of that salary, of that FTE count, that delta, when we increased it, that wasn't the last budget. Was it 2 budgets ago? 23, 24? I'm looking to you.
Don't look at that.
I think that previously we did increase, we did increase an allocation for an FTE to support more within the for the arborist as an FTE. And so part of it is being allocated and spent for that exact reason.
Or allocated and not spent in this.
Well,
We're only at 18, so we're not spending
this-
what we would anticipate.
But this would
with the
be,
staffing and-
so not exactly, so the salaries would never come from the environmental services, that was being funded,
Okay.
so it's coming out of, I believe that FTE is coming out of a portion of planning and community development, so the salaries are separate.
Okay.
But that's what you're gonna see when we pull out the accounting, you're gonna see there are some withdrawals per se from the fund that are being allocated for that additional, I believe it was, I can't remember if it was a 0.1, that was a couple years ago at this point. So 0.1 FTE, but there was an increase in that, the intention during that budget process, and it's being allocated to that.
Thank you. Ready to,
I have a completely different question. If it's okay. Right. So, per our public comment, reminds me, there's not a line item under either operating or non-operating departments for insurance. And I'm wondering, is it just cut up and put into different departments?
It's multiple, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so it is allocated over the municipal services, police, the
public works.
Every department.
Every department has
every fund,
something.
there's different funds, so it's the sewer fund is gonna pay for a portion of it, the surface water fund is gonna pay for a portion of it. So the bill is large, but then that allocation splits out and it's paid for out of multiple places.
Excellent. So which means as a follow-on question, all these 30% ish percentages will rise tremendously in the next dashboard.
The dashboard, yes. The first year of a budget, when you see that insurance bill, hurts. It's not pretty. Your first quarter of a brand new budget fiscal, it doesn't, it's not, it's very visual. And the second year, because there is a little bit more flex, you're seeing some of these items are a little bit, so like municipal services, I'll just use an example, that's at 44%. So before it triggers, it has a little more wiggle room instead of just starting from 0.
Right.
And so it's not quite as visual on the second year, but it is still very present.
Thank you for those clarifications. I
Absolutely.
think you wanted to move on to non-operating. Not
As long as there's no more questions, yeah.
I think we're good.
So walking down to the non-operating, we pull the non-operating departments out because they do not follow. So it's not fair to compare them to the targeted of being 50% because they won't meet that. And if, for example, currently the city is just completing the 23-24 audits. And so from what the city budgeted, we're a little bit over on that. And we're almost over the finish line with that. I'm not as concerned about that. And then if we walk into another 2025 audit within 26 and that triggers and starts, then depending on that dollar amount or when we're able to complete that, we will, it may need a potential budget amendment, but it's way too early to have that conversation at this time. But it would not follow a steady monthly target the way the operating departments do above. The community programs, again, those don't quite follow. We pay a lot of what's within there, the senior service, center, go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
right on.
This, the senior center, the third place commons, all of our community partners, just to highlight a couple, not in any order, that we pay those on a kind of a quarterly basis. So it's not going to track as well for a monthly ongoing.
RCR too.
Mm-hmm.
Also.
Yeah.
That's a month.
Quarterly.
Is it
Quarterly. That's
Oh, you're right.
quarterly. And that's another point that some of the operating actually like dispatch, you're going to see that fluctuation because we pay that quarterly. So there are some that goes back and forth. Emergency management. Oh, excuse me. I skipped over elections. Elections is an annual. So we normally pay that on an annual basis. So we're at 47% and we just received the invoice from them. So over the next couple dashboards, you will see for 2025's King County elections cost. And then within the emergency management, that is mainly where we pay for NEMCO. So that's going to be an annual cost. The city pays in along with Kenmore and the Shoreline Fire. Thank you. Wow, I am on a forgetful roll today. Shoreline Fire, that they're going to pay in on an annual basis. And so that's not going to follow in operating, and it's a one-time deal. The lakefront property, that is again not going to exactly perfectly follow an ongoing target because that's tied to a contract with Facet that has been coming forward to you through our community development department. And then memberships, typically memberships that the city is a part of are annual memberships. A lot of them occur within the first quarter of the year, not all of them. And we just pay them as they come in, but most of them are annual, so it doesn't fit to appropriately track them as an operating expense. And so they're just not tracked in that manner. So again, to try to put it forward, but it just doesn't follow with an operating expense. Police technology, those tend to be one-time purchases or that we allocate or budget for, and so they wouldn't follow under an operating expense. Again, public health is the same way. That's paid on, I believe, an annual basis, and it just doesn't track on an operating. And do you want me to stop?
Yeah.
If there's any questions on this before we move on?
I did have a clarifying question. So that lakefront property in this line item is mostly the contracts and the sort of the design and
That's the
engineering.
design contract.
Okay. Thank you. Any of my colleagues have any questions?
No, I was thinking about that same thing, and it would be nice just to maybe have design in front of that label. So we know
Well,
that it's for that and not for
Yeah.
everything else.
There's
Not for capital.
yeah.
We'll table that conversation, but
Yeah.
I think it seems like there's some interest in the committee to maybe revisit this. We can have a deeper conversation later.
It's actually highlighting the strategic opportunity fund, but to be more specific, I'm labeling what exactly we're doing on this dashboard with that money. But I'm hearing, I'm completely hearing the feedback from that. Was there?
Seeing no more questions,
I've got a couple questions. First, Clerk McLean, I've joined from my laptop, so I'm logged in here twice. I don't know if you can promote me on my laptop to be a participant. I'd appreciate that because then I can log off on one device. Lindsay, when I look at this, here's the hardest part for me to understand. I don't really understand how we're trending against budget based on the numbers that are here. I can look at these percentage averages that exist, and I can make a best thumb in the air guess that we are trending below 50% of the biennium expenditures because almost each one of these is somewhere below 50%. But I don't see any representation in this documentation that shows me where we started the budget, what we projected we were going to spend, and where we are against that, and what the mid-biennium adjustments were that trued up budget, and where we might be standing against that. Is that represented in here somewhere? Is there somewhere for me to see that we are at 47% of the allocated budget for the year or something similar?
No, it's not broken out that way. You have the numbers on the back side of the dashboard, and naturally, if we need some improvements or it's desired to have a change, we can evaluate that. But there will have to be a consideration for the amount of time that it will take. I'm just going to be blunt. Take me to in order to make that change, in addition to everything else going on.
Yes, Mayor.
Chair, if this is the appropriate point, I wanted to talk just briefly about the history of the dashboard. Part of this is the colors, the question that Mr. Anderson brought up. The question of the colors is a little bit interesting because our budget chair for many, many years was colorblind. So there was we had to choose. We had some missteps there, shall we say, and be very sensitive to his needs. And I think too that this is a great place with new members of the council, new budget chair, et cetera, new committee, to think about what the needs are in terms of visibility, unintended, what you're looking for. Councilmember Risha, former Councilmember Risha, had some very specific things that he was looking for in terms of very succinct, visible, trend-related kinds of graphs. And there have been various attempts over periods of time to increase the granularity, and then it's been pulled back, and then it's been increased and pulled back. So it really is dependent upon the body, what you want to do. To Councilmember Muhlenberg's question, what you want to see from a dashboard standpoint. And one of the reasons why I wanted to make this comment now is when we got to when we get to capital, this is a place where budgetary ratio would say, why are we not spending the money? I mean, and the blue lines, where's the money being spent? Because the monies are allocated and expended, and they're budgeted. So having said that, I don't think anything's set in stone, but being very cognizant of Director Vaughn's time and the team's time, I think that there's definitely room for improvement in terms of what you all want to see, in terms of physical graphs, colors, if you will, some various things too. Not getting too far into making it too detailed so it's not something you can look at a glance.
And potentially maybe there's a different, there's the dashboard, if we keep it on a monthly basis, then I don't know if there's a different report that could be generated or more detail on a quarterly basis or something along those lines to meet everybody's needs.
Yeah.
But I'm open to hearing the feedback. Keep going.
Revenue by fund.
Revenue by fund, okay, moving right along. So capital improvement fund, 53%. And then that's real estate excise tax. The general fund is at 52%. The sewer utility fund, 50%. It's probably just slightly under, which is what's targeting the yellow versus the green. It's right there. It's nothing that causes concern for me as the finance director. The street fund is trending just slightly under, but so are the expenditures, so I'm okay with that. The surface water utility, again, 58%. That also is tied to the property tax, so it's going to come in at that time. And then walking down to the traffic safety fund, that's at 37%, and the transportation capital is at 42%, being very, very heavy on grants that are associated directly with the roundabout project. So once that project, the construction starts on that project, then the city will be requesting reimbursement from WSDOT in addition to TIB.
So for example, the transportation safety fund, does that mean that the cameras are generating 13% less revenue in 2025 than we thought they were going to? Is that how I understand that number?
So two separate funds. You have the traffic safety fund, which is separate than the transportation capital fund. The traffic safety fund is where the school walk zone cameras are coming in. The transportation capital fund is where the roundabout is taking place.
So the traffic safety fund, the 002.
Okay. 002, yes. And that's,
so that fund is at 37% of where we thought it would be in the biennium. That implies to me that the cameras produce 13% less revenue than we anticipated.
There is a major caveat in this, that we built this budget in 25 and 26 when we had very little information about the trends on those cameras. So once it started, and we had active and we were charging for tickets, it was in the final quarter of 2024. So the city had to do a best educated guess at this point because we didn't have actual data in order to create that. So I want to be mindful with that when we make statements that we were off target because we didn't really have solid information and data to go off of when basically we were building the budget on estimates from no actual data.
Yeah, so I totally get that, but it still, I think, is representing that the revenue is 13% below what we projected it was going to be based on those estimates we made in 2024.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
But doesn't that mean that they're working too?
Well, I mean, they're Yeah, I
But
mean,
you're right, I call up that.
to Director Vaughn's point, we're putting the budget together, we start the budget process in June with the staff. And by the time it hits council, it's August, and those cameras really didn't come online until November.
Fourth quarter.
And then
Yeah.
November was kind of a mess, working things out with the courts and the Association of Courts. And we finally got those up and running late December. And so, yeah, they are generating revenue and it's more than any of the other cameras, in the city. But it was off of what we anticipated, and that was because it was just looking at data, looking at trends of our current cameras, and these trends, I think they dropped off a little more quickly than anticipated. There's a lot of challenges to them because they're a newer type of traffic camera. And there's also reductions that are required by law on those. So a lot of factors went into it. But yeah, to the council member Muhlenberg's point, yes, we are 13% below where we thought we would be. And I think we'll refine that number for the next budget.
Yeah, we haven't.
And there's no judgment in that statement. I'm just trying to understand what I'm looking at in these reports. Like my first meeting here, trying to understand what this information is trying to convey to me.
Thank you. Do you have a?
I can wait. It's to follow up is that the city very cautiously allocated expenditures in the 25-26 original budget and was absolutely nowhere near the estimated revenue. So very cautiously allocated the expenditures, not budgeting against what the anticipated revenue would be walking in, because there was so much unknown. So just to make that
So
statement.
we're not going to be upside down with what we already have in our budget.
Correct.
Thank you. Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, continuing with traffic safety, something I noticed, so the traffic safety fund revenue is at 37%. If we look at operating, traffic safety camera and operations also averages out to about 37% of expenses. Are those two correlated with each other, or is it just a coincidence?
They're based off of two different numbers. So if we,
I think it's a coincidence.
it's based off of two different, so it's 37% of the actual budgeted number, which the budgeted number is gonna, if you go to the backside, they're gonna be different.
I think that's the question is
It's not dollar for dollar.
Correct.
it's dollar for dollar, but is it
I suppose I was
one
wondering.
goes up, the other goes up,
if
one
it
goes
mean-
down, the other goes down?
I guess to clarify, what I was asking is if it meant that our traffic cameras were issuing fewer citations, that also meant lower overhead expenses to process those citations. And so would those revenue and expenses move in tandem, or as Chair Riddle said, it's just a coincidence?
Not necessarily, because there are foundational fixed expenses relative to the traffic cameras. I think the other thing is to Councilmember Muhlenberg's point, it is the estimation was considerably high based on the traffic numbers that we're seeing. It is a success, to Councilmember Good's point, it is a success, almost, it's actually over 10 mile an hour average speed drop in that corridor. But the expectation was it was going to be close to 8 million, I believe, over the biennium, and at half of the biennium away, we're behind 13% basically. So that again is a good problem to have. We've all talked about it being a zero revenues is where we want to be, honestly, because these people are obeying the law. At the same time, to Councilmember Golden's point, that there are foundational expenses and fixed expenses, and a reminder that under state statute, we're not allowed to pay a vendor for traffic cameras based on volume. It's just the way it is. There are certain thresholds that can be considered in that payment scheme. Scheme sounds negative, but in that program. Awkward words, sorry folks. But there, and it's actually better for the community. People at large.
Thank you. Do you feel like tackling capital?
Let's walk to Capitol. This is one of my favorite parts of
John Risha, right?
So right.
Scale.
It doesn't, this is, I know, and we're gonna work, we will. I want to be careful over promising anything, so we're just gonna, there's areas for improvement on this portion of the report. The 35th Avenue drainage design, that project is completed and done. So it's that it doesn't really reflect that in this report. When that project occurred, it was anticipated that and budgeted, amended, I should maybe actually say, when that was put in as an amendment for 2024 and carried forward, the city thought that the project was going to cost a lot more and was able to come up with a much smaller cost solution in order to address that issue, that emergency issue. So that is why you're seeing what you're seeing. The cost was a lot less than what was budgeted because we were able to minimize the cost with the solution that was acceptable to solve the problem.
We just never trued up the budget.
Correct. We
Okay.
never reduced it. So, and then the asphalt overlays and ramps, the city did complete overlays in 2025, and the city has not received an invoice from King County from 2025, even though I've been asking for months. So this is where we work really hard in
Very
order
hard to spend our money, but
to
you have to take it.
to reflect it accurately in the burn rate. Speaking of going in and tapping into Risha, that's one of his favorite words that he used to always tell me is the burn rate. So at some point you will see a reflection of that cost within the budget, within the capital. The Beach Drive lift station construction, that currently is in design, and the construction that is not in the near future as far as seeing any type of expenditure on the construction side of that project. It's still in design. The L90 culvert construction, that is going to be later in 2026. So that you will not see paid to date a bar on that for a while. The culvert, the northeast culvert, the 195th and 104, that one probably just simply needs to be removed as the city is not going to be working on that culvert. That's a project with others.
That's a joint project with Shoreline, if you remember, and with the Army
Yeah.
Corps of Engineers. And the Army Corps of Engineers, it was probably 3 years ago that we did the kind of groundbreaking for Representative Giant Hall. It was a 6 to 7 year process just for the Army Corps to get through their stuff. So we're committed to this. There are some anticipated costs, but that's way in the future. So that's going to come up here because
It's
it
future.
doesn't belong there yet.
It doesn't belong to you
It's a
yet.
future project.
Could you describe for the edification of everybody and new councilors where the culvert is? And just briefly what this.
Sure, the culvert runs east of 104 on Northeast 195th. It's a stream that comes down out of Shoreline, goes underneath 195th. There's a ditch on the north side of 195th that acts to handle large storm events and flooding. And it was inappropriately designed. The culvert is undersized. And so there's been some temporary work done by the city of Shoreline that we help pay into for a temporary fix while the Corps does the design work to move that project forward. Shoreline's basically the lead on this project, but it's.
And then as it continues south, it goes under 104, right? And
Yeah.
is that one also being addressed,
Well,
replaced, do you remember? Or just
No,
up to it?
just the upper one under that. Yeah,
Okay.
there's some work along 104 with the gate baskets that are failing, that work will need to be done, but I don't believe that lower culvert has any work tied into this.
So this project is a joint project with Shoreline, support of the Army Corps. That's very cool. We had a groundbreaking, I think it was 3 years ago, and the Giant Ball. And her team was very gracious to be very supportive of this project. And so it's something that's important up there because there has been flooding of condominiums directly adjacent to that multiple times. So
It desperately needed. Facilities projects.
Facilities, that's just where, the city has had to make some improvements just within City Hall. At a small dollar amount, and the roundabout construction, that small amount is, the city is actually, engaging with right of ways and purchasing the right of ways. And so that dollar amount is, that you're seeing on construction is right of way acquisitions at this time. And then if we move on to the back side of the dashboard, this is where you're going to see the numbers that reflect everything that you're seeing on the front side of the dashboard. So when you see the building department, I'm just going to use the first one as the example. That is the 25-26 budget. And then the paid to date and the percentage of where that's at for the moment.
And that budget reflects the mid-buy, right?
And this budget does reflect the inclusion of the mid-biennial budget adjustments. And if you walk down all the way to the very end of that, the traffic safety operations, which was the question of the 30%, that those two are close. This is where the 32% of the traffic safety operations is based off of almost a $3.5 million budget. And so it's 32% of that. And if you walk over to the revenue by fund, the traffic safety fund revenue is 37% of a very different number. So the budget is 8 million, and then it's almost 3 million, 2.9 at 37%. So it's those numbers percentage wise are close, but they're representing a percentage of two very different budget to actual numbers. So I just wanted to circle back on that, highlight that that question from Councilmember Muhlenberg. Or was it budget chair? But anyways, a council member. Thank you. I'll just
But I heard earlier. Yeah.
Moving on. Yeah, sorry about that.
So
Okay.
generally speaking, we don't revisit these line items unless there's a specific request, because it's reflected in the bar graphs on the front of the dashboard, except for.
We do always go over the revenue by line item.
Can I ask you a question, please?
Yes.
On the capital section, on the bar graph on the front, there are 7 capital projects,
Yes,
but the capital table on the back has 13 lines.
that is correct. And it, no matter what we do to Tableau, that is the result that we are receiving. So we've had multiple people look at it. We've had multiple people with their hands on it to try to produce that result. And I think that at this point, we're going to just minimize this in order to show the active projects to be more helpful. And then we're going to have to lean on, after our public works director, our new public works director gets her feet underneath her, we're going to have to again lean back into capital projects on a quarterly basis where the council is walked through projects on a more detailed level from public works, not necessarily from the higher level from finance, so that they can give you the insight.
And
more
for those
directly.
that are new, part of it is because the capital that we're seeing here is restricted to this budget cycle. Whereas what we can see from Public Works could be the entire project if it spans beyond the 2 years. So they're gonna be looking at different scales of the project,
Can I make
potentially.
a request? So I know that we have a separate capital project information document that we get updates on. I think something that might be helpful here, because looking at the graph, the expenditures are quite small, as Councilman Risha would say. And so having context about, well, it's small because we haven't broken ground on the roundabout yet. And so adding on that context of, for these capital projects, when will they start? When will they end? That would help us to understand why we've only expended such a small fraction of some of these.
And that You remember that quarterly update was something that I took on back when Director Parago was here to help with that workload. Something that Director Dickinson was gonna pick up for me, and now we're in this shift, so it will come back, and we did get into that level of detail of the schedule and things, and if you wanna know schedule tonight on anything related to this, I can answer.
Oh, nothing specific. I just think it might make this more transparent to the public to explain the yellow bars are so small because the project hasn't properly started yet. And so it's providing that context that be helpful.
I think that goes back to public comment because I do not like Tableau. It's too limiting. You cannot give the data that you would like to, a separate report, maybe like Director Vaughn indicated, maybe quarterly, go with that to explain those things.
Thank you.
Helpful.
Just quickly on point to your question on capital too, and then the number of things on the back here, line items. Say some of these things, as Director Bond has indicated, are seasonal. Safe Streets early action, we're waiting for some seasonal shifts in the weather to do some striping and bike lanes and some other different things there, crosswalks as well. So similarly, when it comes to the overlay program, we have generally we expend about $800,000. Dependent upon the vagaries of the county, et cetera. That's kind of what we're fairly limited to. It tends to not be nearly enough, as you know, with the many miles we have of improvements necessary. But almost all of that comes from our TBD,
It
correct?
does 100%.
100%.
100% of
Yeah,
it does.
there wasn't any additional capital that's coming in for that, but we will see increases in expenditure on Safe Streets, some of these other projects as spring comes into sharp relief.
And the TBD is funded
Soon.
through car tax.
So, yeah, the
Yeah.
For those that don't know.
TBD is the Transportation Benefit District Fund, and that's Fund 104, and that is funded through the vehicle tabs, in addition to council also adopted bringing in the 0.1 sales tax. So there's two forms of revenue that then go into directly funding the asphalt overlay and ADA ramps, in addition to when the city moves forward with the Public Works Trust Fund loan. What's Public Works? It's not.
It's
Board.
forward, yeah.
The Public Works Board,
Changed them.
when they move forward with that, then the debt on that will also be paid out of the Transportation Benefit District. TBD.
Yep. Thank you. And then revenue by line item, these were sort of,
These are
reselect these and reselect these.
These are
you see fit.
handpicked as line items. They're kind of handpicked, literally. For one reason or another, we've had our eye on them, and over the years, the reason has changed. And we have added to that in order to highlight certain ones, and we've pulled some of them off. They have changed over time. Again, business tax, and I'll just walk down them, and if there's any questions, please jump in. The business tax is at 55%. The construction permits are at 55%. The gas tax, or the motor vehicle excise tax, the MVET, that's at 46%, and that's from the street fund. That's street fund revenue. The mechanical and plumbing permits are at 61%. The passport revenue is at 51%. And again, I'm going to actually give this a shout out because it was outperforming what we budgeted. So we amended that in addition for revenue and expenditures. So shout out on that. Good job, Matt. And then real estate excise tax 1 and 2, that is at 81%, which is very consistently budgeted conservatively because it can change at the drop of a hat, and it's one-time revenue from home sales, and it is very restricted.
We looked at, I think we're thinking the same thing, sale of town center.
Bingo.
Is that why we're at 81%? I don't know.
Yes,
Yes.
Okay,
that too.
I didn't realize we
Yes.
That's an anomaly.
received that money.
Yeah, I guess that's,
Okay.
it's reflecting
Yes.
that,
One-off.
one of those one-time funds
Yeah.
that help us through, noted right there.
Except for it's restricted.
But it's
Yeah,
restricted.
it's restricted in the sense that you have to be able to, they're for capital, one-time funds, support one-time projects, so they're capital projects. That both of them fund, REIT 1 and REIT 2, it gets more specific with REIT 2. So the sales and use tax, that is coming in at 57%. And then the traffic safety camera revenue at 43%. And this is the traffic safety camera revenue. This is tied to the traffic or the school zone and red light tickets. This is the general fund tickets, not or
So it's
penalties, fines.
when yellow light is flashing and then the red light cameras.
Yeah,
Right.
the school zone.
Right. No, I just want to make sure we're clear about that. Is not. Well, I don't want to get into that too granular on this, but the question about the restrictions on usage of funds. So the public.
This one is just
Right.
this is the general fund line item for, again, school zone cameras, excluding and the red light cameras, not the school walk zone cameras.
The distinction is that the O2 fund is a subset of the general fund,
Correct.
but it's restricted. Right? That's the clarification.
And these are
And
the grandfathered in unrestricted
We
general fund.
refer
Yes.
to the traffic,
Right.
those funds, the school walk zone traffic safety funds as the traffic. Oh, wow, I just merged that all together. In the traffic safety fund, which is 002, completely separately because it is so restricted as a sub fund of the general fund, but by itself.
Thank you.
There's my.
Alone,
Clear
There's
and
one.
put together.
That's for it.
Yes.
The circle within a circle. Okay. Any questions from the committee? Or
I mean, maybe I need a city finance 101 conversation that's outside of this meeting, but I don't understand how the traffic safety camera revenue, that bottom yellow line at 43%, ties to that traffic safety fund line up above at 37%.
It doesn't.
they're different.
They're two different funds. So the traffic safety fund with the yellow line, those are the original cameras. So they're under a different legislation. They are the red light cameras and the school zone cameras, the flashing yellow lights.
And we had revenue on those in 2025.
Those have been in
Yes.
place since like 2009.
The original ones.
Yeah, the original.
Oh yeah, not 2000.
So these are the cameras that you're on Bothell Way and Ballinger, the red light cameras, and then the school zone. So those have been in for more than a decade. So we've always had revenue on those. Those at the time that the administration and council put those into place, those flow directly into the general fund, and that's part of your general fund revenue. The line above with the traffic safety fund of the revenue of 2.9 million. Those are the new cameras, just the school walk zone on Northeast 178. We refer to them as the 24/7 cameras. They are under different legislation and they can only be spent for traffic safety. So
So if I make an inference from the numbers I see here, does that mean that those new cameras are generating 15 times the revenue of the red light cameras? Because the scale on the revenue line is hundreds of thousands and the scale in the table above is in millions.
Yes, they generate far more revenue than the other cameras. They're also newer, so you will see, Kenmore has seen with their new cameras, like a 50% drop in citations in a matter of months. Ours are taking longer to level out, but you will see them continue to drop because
Behavior changes.
being what it is, yeah, behavior changes. We also have a little bit different. Northeast 178 is a connector. It's downhill. But yes, it is generating that much more revenue. And that's why we have to be careful of how we spend against it, because some point the other shoe will drop and maybe people will start to behave themselves and drive how they should.
And I will state that during the pandemic, when schools closed down, this was an area of revenue that completely just stopped. So it has the potential, and it was an area that caused, that definitely we were evaluating at that time. So there are revenues that are more volatile with situations like we always talk about sales tax. If the economy changes, if anything, it just simply fear that something could happen. That's a lot of times people pull back on spending. So we do monitor sales tax and use tax very closely because of that, because it has the potential to be more volatile. So there are certain line items that are in that sense.
Thank you. Councilmember Goldman.
Yes,
Saw your hand.
would now be an appropriate time to bring up that the state legislature is currently considering a bill that would change the formula for what portion of our camera revenue is ours versus goes to the state?
I would wait on that one. Okay. Because we don't know the outcome of that, and that has to do with the percentage after 4 years that you have to share for Jones Fund.
I suppose in a month, we will know one way or the other what happens with that bill.
We'll see you the next time we meet.
So, and on point, I mean, last year, as we were 2 years ago, as we were ramping up the investigation of what we should do with the school zone cameras, et cetera, the legislation, everything changed in the middle of where we were. We were pivoting, we were trying to work under the old law, then we had to work under the new law because the Association of Courts would not honor part of what direction we're going. So there's a lot of things, and the fluidity of this is something that we try to communicate to the legislature. Please provide clarity and some stability. It's really important to understand how we can utilize these funds, particularly, I mean, the restricted funds, the O2 funds, really important for investments in pedestrian multimodal safety. At the same time, there's certain kinds of things you cannot use these funds for, and some cities are being very free with how they're spending those funds. We are very, very careful because we don't want to have them clawed back or told that they're challenged for an audit. So,
Well, if you remember during 2024, the legislature in their initial bills was looking at clawing the dollars back that cities like Lake Forest Park had going into their general fund, clawing that back and saying you could no longer let that flow into your general fund. That's a negative impact. That, a city like Lake Forest Park is part of your general fund revenue, and if you lost those dollars, how would you be able to replace them? That was the push and pull until that bill finally came down to the end, where it's like your grandfather did, but anything new is now restricted to traffic safety, traffic calming, complete streets.
Did I see your hand? Okay. Councilmember Muhlenberg, I see you.
Yeah, probably inappropriate timing as well, but I was reading about the millionaire tax today and Governor Ferguson's comments on that. And should that pass and there's no sales tax on purchases under $1,000, that must have potential to have profound impact on our revenue generation as well. Am I interpreting that right? Is that a piece of legislation we need to be paying attention to as a city?
I believe they were talking about having sales tax holidays twice a year that other states do as well. So it would not be in the aggregate, it would only be a couple times per year. They've also been exploring whether or not it makes sense to remove sales tax for certain kinds of items that are necessities for, and are the sales tax are in that case are regressive, very much so because of the basic needs of young families, et cetera. So to the question of, we'll see where it goes. The sales tax holidays would only be 2 days a year is what the governor's proposing. And that would be, the spirit of that, I think, is also to support young families going back to school. They go back, they buy school supplies, they buy coats, backpacks, things like that. That's my understanding.
Thanks, Mayor.
Below 1,000.
Don't say, yeah, they're still in session.
I know so much of this is still churning, which makes it difficult for us to respond to, because in a few days it could look slightly different or very different as we've seen in the past. I guess they're all worth watching. But not responding to yet, not till we see the final.
Yeah.
Any other questions relating to the dashboard? Thank you so much, Director Vaughn, for bringing this to us. I know January, early February, a lot of closeout work that you and your team are doing, so glad that we got to see this. I think typically we see January and February and March. Is that what I typically remember? So we'll be able to see those 2 months. We'll really only focus on February because January. Yes. But then that's where you're gonna see those peaks when we have the one-time memberships and one-time invoices that come through. We'll see those scary little peaks happen that even out over the course of the year. I heard a lot of really great suggestions and ideas around the dashboard. Again, we are limited to this sort of Tableau piece, plus adding work to somebody's workload if we're gonna go beyond that. So I think we need to be very cautious, but I encourage the conversation. If you have any more ideas.
How does it have though? What is it? It's software.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
business intelligence.
Yeah,
It's BI software.
yeah.
But it's very locked in. What you purchase, you're limited to the fields and the size. And it's the y-axis on the capital, at $1 million instead of something more granular where you can actually see the spend.
Yeah.
That's been a problem.
Yeah.
Not just better,
So-
you can invent it and have $1 billion exit. Nice.
What's the next step up?
I know.
Well,
The next,
Now you just ask ChatGPT to make it.
Yeah, I mean, you put in an Excel file and have ChatGPT make it.
It's not a step up, it's a modernization. Tableau is 20 years old and has not advanced, and there's all kinds of new tools out there that are available.
They just cost money.
and
They
yeah,
should-
is it time to budget for it?
Not yet, but maybe close as we're getting more complicated,
or maybe there's just
budgeting
different,
that's happening.
maybe there's just different ways we can come up with presenting the financial information in a report or
Yeah.
that's more digestible for some feedback and naturally what it just takes is time, which is this is a challenging time of year for finance because we are closing a year out. We're looking at already we're closing audits out. We're trying to finish and true up 2025's annual financial report that we need to be submitting. So there's a lot of moving parts in finance in addition to everything else. So
just to kind of, I heard some ideas. We obviously had the public comment had some great ideas. I heard things around, well, just more of the same, I think. I was thinking adding fund numbers to things that are a whole fund or partial fund so that we can keep track of the various things that are in the 001 and then the things that are in the, 304 or whatever it is, might be helpful to track that back to the budget because the budget does use fund numbers as well. So if you have any ideas, then we can take them in. I guess email me or the committee. You can email the committee, and if it's viable, we'll integrate it. If not, we'll have longer discussions about it. I'm going to go to Councilmember Muhlenberg.
Along those same comments, Samra, I've noticed in the city of Seattle's budget documents, they specify when spending is coming from a restricted fund or an unrestricted fund. And in many of their budget line items, some money comes from the unrestricted fund and then others come from the restricted fund. It would be really helpful to understand how our finances work to have a sense of where we're allowed to spend the money from in each one of these allocations.
That's a great point.
That is a good point. Yeah, that is a great point. CIP.
And did we ever get an answer to the blue thing?
The blue thing is
Oh.
independent of the percent, the timeline through the year. So
Yeah.
it doesn't respond to the you're ahead or behind because it's not a monthly tracking.
yeah,
Type of-
it doesn't follow
There's the blue.
an operating target which will increase steadily on a monthly basis. So an operating department would follow salaries, would follow ongoing expenditures that are expending on a monthly basis versus the non-operating like NEMCO that we support and have an ILA for. That's going to be a one-time a year payment, which is our emergency management. The memberships are going to be a one-time a year payment. So they're not going to track in the same manner that an operating expense would.
Okay, thanks for that. And yeah, I was just thinking that one line in the explanatory notes at the top just might, yeah, solve that. Thanks.
Well, and I think too, if I may, that this illustrates the point, the questions that Matt, you've asked, and Tracy and Larry and all of you, all and everyone. Sometimes this dashboard, I think we've gotten to the place where dashboard is, I don't know what the right expression is, sort of inside baseball, sort of like there's some assumptions. Some of us have been so close to it for so long,
We don't know what the
so
questions are.
yeah, the background is necessary, and this is the absolute appropriate time for you all to please reach out. We're available anytime if we can answer the questions. Happy to sit down and walk you through, because municipal finance is very different from conventional finance, and it can be very challenging to get up to speed on it, and as well as the subtleties of our specific situation here. Restrictions, as Mr. Muhlenberg mentioned, restrictions on the funds, as Councilmember used to call the color of the money. I mean, there's lots of things that are subtle that we sometimes forget because we've been too close to it. So please call us out on that, and happy to sit down and talk it through.
Yeah, and I am willing to start putting together maybe the budget chair and I can connect and if I can produce some reports that you think are more appropriate to responsive to what's being requested. If you guys can, as a team, be gracious that this takes time and it's going to come from me. If you could be gracious on that, then we will work towards improving to what works for everybody. Yeah, that would be my request.
This dashboard, while produced by finance department, is our tool to monitor. So if there's something that we want to see more of or is less important, this is for us to be able to bring that to Director Bond and say, can we make these adjustments? What do we want to know about the city finances? How do we track it?
For me, it's mostly just revolving around the projects that we have and understanding what the total budget is with everything in and where we are is kind of, I think, what is important to me. I'm okay with some of the rest not being that way, but the projects themselves, because those are capital money and that would help the public too, because I get a lot of requests. Well, they say it's this, but it's really that. And it's because, it's the total's just not being listed, maybe.
Well, as we've got that CIP dashboard that I worked with Councilmember Lebo to create, that we will bring back once Nova's on board. And that's pulled back up, and that answers a lot of these questions.
So it's public facing.
Yeah. Yeah, just with this transition, it wasn't something we were gonna get done.
Yeah.
At this point, right, yes. I also encourage us to continue with the capital projects dashboards.
Well, we definitely will. It's been a good tool.
Oh. Matt, or sorry. Councilmember Mueller.
It's all right. I called you Semra, so Councilmember Riddle, my apologies. I think when I first looked at this packet, the thing that was most striking to me is I didn't see a document that showed us what we budgeted at the start of the biennium and where we were against that original budget. Because we did a true up in December, everything's been adjusted to what that true up was. I don't know how to do planning if I can't look at where I started and thought I was going to be, so that I can project in the future where I think I might be going. By inserting the true up at the end of the year, it erases for me all of the history of what happened over the course of the year. And I would love to understand that history, because it then helps me model out and think proactively about, well, what might happen in the future.
That's an excellent point, if I may. Excellent point, Councilmember Muhlenberg. It's funny, I was kind of chuckling because there were people at the end of the year saying, we want to see the true up. We want to see the true up right now. We don't care about what happened before. So, but the historical context is absolutely essential for predictions and planning. So that's an excellent point.
And
Hang on.
I would say, oh,
Do you want to cover that?
I was just gonna highlight the exact level of detail that you're requesting actually is, you, I think, have it in your email at this time. For the council retreat that's happening on Saturday. So,
It's a 6-year
it's
financial
just,
forecast.
it's just the general fund within the 6-year forecast. But it's the original budget plus the amended, and it shows and it highlights out on a line item basis. What you're requesting, so maybe take a look at that. And then let me know if that's along the lines of what you're looking for. Again, that is used for budgeting purposes, and I will just share with you that the last budget season between 25 and 6 was very tight and very challenging, as is something we say on a very ongoing basis during our budget processes. And I think it's been identified that through our budget amendment, we're just simply budgeting too lean. That it's not through the mid-buy process, you're gonna see that things are being trued up, that in my mind, we just cut back too tight. We went too lean into the meat there. And we've gone through every exercise you can come up with. And during the pandemic, it forced us to, and then coming out of the pandemic, our city administration basically said, we're zero-based budgeting. You have to defend every penny that is going into this budget. Just because you've had $20,000 in your training budget for the last, whatever, 6 years, I need you to defend every penny you are requesting. And there was a ton of work that went into the previous budget, basically erasing everything from the ground up. It was rebuilt. And so I'm bringing some of this history forward so that you know where we've been in the past and where we're, the conversations that you're going to hear throughout the year. And so, but I did want to bring up that you do have, I don't know if that's posted quite yet, but the council members at least have that information that will be covered at the council retreat.
Yes, I posted.
we get so used to the format of the budget and fund balances, ending fund balances. It may be useful to bring some of that pattern into here. So we've got the line item of specifics, but then where are we doing in that fund? What is the amended fund balance versus the original, and how far are we through that fund as a total? We might be thinking maybe somewhere along those lines, but it's kind of how we see the budget and how we, look at the budget that way. It's kind of makes it a little bit more comparable. To be able to see how we're doing against the budget. And I think a cover sheet maybe with the highlights of the top 5 things that, are unique. Nothing really thorough might be a useful tool, just as we go through here. It could also speed things up because maybe we just talk about those 5 things. Unless a council member has a question. So I think we're gonna really rethink this whole process.
I think that in my mind, step 1 would be the schedules you want to see, or the schedules or the numbers or the templates, a table that works for everybody. I think that would be, in my mind, just correct me if I'm wrong. Step 1 would be to create the tables showing the financial information the way that works for council members to digest what the city has originally budgeted, what they've amended, where they're actually at on the revenues and the expenditures for each fund, And then we'll build it from there, meaning we will get it more granular, and if you guys can stay patient with me, we will build it and we will improve it as a team. And then the words will come. But if we can get the templates first, as far as the tables, then we will build the words around the templates to explain what's happening with sales tax, what's happening, if that would be all right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're gonna spend a couple of meetings, maybe just working through this as a group, and then we'll kind of let you go off and do the technical side of how it can be created.
And maybe we just take and repurpose some of this stuff and have like a general fund. I don't know, I'll come up with some ideas. I'll think tank it, and then we will bring it back and make sure it works for everybody.
So Councilor Muhlenberg, I kind of heard from you, original budget versus amended budget versus spent for items. Was there any other areas that you have thoughts or concerns or requests?
I'll spend some time trying to summarize that, Councilmember Riddle, and I'll provide that to you as chairman of the committee.
Okay, thank you.
And we can
Yeah.
have a meeting if that would be.
Yeah,
a
I'm sure there
side
will be a
meeting. A side meeting if, but yeah, offline.
Yeah. And I apologize, Tracy, I saw your hand earlier,
No,
but I moved beyond. Are you okay?
I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate that.
Question was answered.
Question did get answered.
Exactly right.
All right. We are old business. We have no old business this year. It's our first meeting. So we're not gonna really be digging into that. Other than new business being kind of revisit the format of the information we get. Is there any new business from my committee members that you would like to bring up at the moment?
Right now.
Okay. Okay, so we have some new business, which is kind of just to work on the dashboard. We'll call it that. So we'll kind of track that for a little while. Next time is old business. All right, seeing that we have no new business, it is 7:22, and I believe we can adjourn for the evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.